Chapter 3. I started to call to the girls, but Chuck clamped his hand over my mouth and dragged me behind a wide tree. "Hey, get your clammy paws off me! What's the big idea?" I cried when he finally pulled his hand away. He pushed me against the rough bark of the tree trunk. "Shh! They haven't seen us." He motioned with his eyes toward the two girls. So, we could sneak up on them and scare them," Chuck whispered, his dark eyes practically glowing with evil excitement. "Let's make Beth scream." "You mean for old time's sake?" Chuck nodded, grinning. For many years, making Beth scream had been our hobby. That's because she was a really good screamer, and she would scream at just about anything. One day in the lunchroom last year, Chuck tucked a worm inside a turkey sandwich. Then he gave the sandwich to Beth. She took one bite and knew that something tasted a little weird. When Chuck showed her the big bite she'd taken out of the worm, Beth screamed for a week. Chuck and I took bets on who could scare Beth the most and who could make her scream. I guess it was kind of mean, but it was funny too. And sometimes we know that people are really easy to scare. You have no choice. You have to scare them as often as you can. Anyway, that all changed last Halloween. Last Halloween, Chuck and I had a horrible scare. Beth wore the most frightening mask I'd ever seen. It wasn't a mask, it was like a living face. It was so ugly, so real. It glared at us with evil, living eyes. Its mouth sneered at us with real lips. The skin glowed a sick green, and Beth's normally soft voice burst out in a terrifying animal growl. Chuck and I ran for our lives. No joke, we were terrified. We ran up the blocks, screaming the whole way. It was the worst night of my life. Everything changed after that. Nearly a whole year has gone by, and we haven't tried to scare Beth once. I don't think Beth can be scared. Not anymore. After last Halloween, I don't think anything scares her. She is totally fearless. I haven't heard her shriek or scream once the entire year. So I didn't want to try to scare her now. I need to talk to her about that scary mask of hers. But Chuck kept pressing me back against the tree trunk. "Come on, Steve," he whispered. "They don't see us. We'll duck down behind the hedges and get ahead of them. Then when they come by, we'll jump out and grab them." I started. But I could see that Chuck had his heart set on scaring Beth and Sabrina, so I let him pull me down out of sight. A light rain had started to fall. The gusting wind blew the raindrops into my face. I crept along the hedge, bent low, following Chuck. We passed by the girls and kept moving. I could hear Sabrina's laugh behind us. I heard Beth say something else, and Sabrina laughed again. I wonder what they were talking about. I stopped to glance through the hedge. Beth had a weird expression on her face. Her dark eyes stared straight ahead. She was moving stiffly. She had the collar of her blue down jacket pulled up high around her face. I ducked down low again as the girls came closer. I turned and saw that Chuck and I were standing on the white front lawn of the old Carpenter mansion. I felt the chill as I stared across the weed-choked lawn at the gloomy old house, covered in a deep darkness. Everyone said that the house was haunted by people who had been murdered inside it 100 years ago. I don't believe in ghosts, but I don't like standing so close to the creepy old Carpenter mansion either. I pulled Chuck into the empty lot next door. Rain pattered the ground. I wiped raindrops off my eyebrows. Beth and Sabrina were only a few yards away. I could hear Sabrina talking excitedly about something, but I couldn't make out her words. Chuck turned to me, an evil grin spreading across his face. "Ready?" he whispered. "Let's get him." We leaped to our feet, then we both jumped out, screaming at the top of our lungs. Sabrina gasped in shock. Her mouth dropped to her knees. Her hands flew up in the air. Beth stared at me. Then her head tilted against the blue jacket collar, tilted and fell. Her head fell off her shoulders. It dropped to the ground and bounced onto the grass. Sabrina lowered her eyes to the ground. She gave the Beth's fallen head in disbelief. Then Sabrina's hands began to flail in the air crazily. She opened her mouth in a scream of horror and screamed and screamed and screamed. Chapter 4, next time, peeps.